Good morning, good afternoon, and well, I guess good night, wherever you guys are watching from. Welcome to the How to Manage Your Resource Pool in the Most Effective Manner Utilizing Microsoft Office 365 Project Online. My name is Mark Söster, and I'm the Managing Director of IPMO, an organization that is fully dedicated implementing project portfolio management solutions to organizations throughout Australia and the world. Now, the reason why I decided to utilize this particular example is because Microsoft decided to increase the capability of resource management within Microsoft Project Server and Microsoft Project Online, and I wanted to make sure that that we can cover some of those mechanics. Now, first of all, let's quickly go through the agenda. The agenda right now outlines that that I'm going to go through this general resource management agenda and why resource management is so hard. We'll talk about the difference between project work and business as usual work and the challenge of balancing those kind of work items. We'll go through different scenarios to ensure that you see how you can actually utilize the technology to support your process. However, the important bit here is to mention that you do require a process in order to do resource management. Technology alone will not do the trick. At the end, I'm also going to outline just a couple of reporting capabilities that Project Online has to offer in regards to the resource engagement model. And at the end, we're going to go and have top 3 takeaways. I know that you guys have been utilizing or viewing quite a few different presentations, so I wanted to make sure that I don't overwhelm you with the data set that we have. All right, let's start. So why is resource management so hard? Well, that's a very good question, but ultimately, really, we deal with people, and as soon as you start dealing with people, things change all the time. I may plan a resource to start working on Monday. They call in sick the next day or on that day, and you have to start moving out your task assignments, and the maintenance of those very, very rapid changes is actually the frustrating part. So resource management, what exactly does that actually mean for us as an organization? Now, first of all, we need to understand what kind of work we need to accomplish. Now, in organizations, that's generally any type of work. What kind of work needs to be done on a project basis, or what kind of work needs to be done on a business as usual basis, for example, operational tasks that need to be done on a very regular basis. So really, we need to understand what type of work the organization needs to do. And then on the other hand, we have our global resource pool. That's essentially our workforce. The workforce enables us to map the work that needs to be done to the resources. Now, generally, we call that a assignment. So the assignment between the resource and the work in our instance, and hopefully in your instance as well, is actually generally accomplished through a schedule. And what that schedule enables us to do is it enables us to create our work breakdown structure with the amount of effort that is involved per task, and then we have the ability to assign the resources, which then ultimately will give us an understanding of what we need to request from a resource perspective. But at the same time, it also allows organizations then to have an overarching view of all of the resources that they are currently have in their organization, and whether those resources are actually over or under allocated or optimally utilized. And really, that's the purpose of the resource management. Let's have a look a little bit into the work and what type of work we are generally talking about. Now, what kind of work could be part of your project, could be part of your organization? Well, generally, it is project-related work, it's business as usual work or operational work, and it is administrative time. So any kind of time that can't be allocated to either project or business as usual work, non-project meetings and organizational meetings and things like that. On the other hand, when we manage our global resource pool, we do have our actual resource pool, and we differentiate between named resources and generic resources. The only reason why we do that is because we don't always know whether John or Paul or Sue or Anne actually is going to be allocated to that task. And for me as a project manager, I need to ensure that I actually allocate resources, not just to calculate my cost, but also from my resource demand point of view. So a generic resource is a roles-based resource, for example, a project manager, an engineer, or a business analyst, whereby a named resource is actually a real resource. Now, when we know that, and by the way, Project Online and Project Server as such can actually manage multiple different types of resources. We are going to talk about the work resources, of course. Work resources are essentially human resources or resources that impact your schedule, whereby cost resources are cost allocations to the schedule, and material resources are so-called consumptions or consumables. As you progress through a task, so will it take those material resources away from the task itself. However, we want to concentrate on the work resources because these are the resources we want to be able to manage with our resource engagement model. Okay. Now, as part of our resource management, we also need to understand what kind of information or attributes we would like to associate, and ultimately it is the information we want to view or visualize or to report against resources or teams or organizational overarching resource pools. For example, in the named resources, of course, the capacity utilization, availability, what kind of resources there may be, whether they're full-time, part-time, contractors, etc. And of course, we also need to determine whether they actually are available or whether they're on holiday or whether they may be sick. We may want to know what kind of team they belong to, what kind of skill sets they have, and all of these wonderful things, whereby on the generic resource front, you generally want to know the role and the skill sets behind it and how many named resources will actually equate to the total pool of generic resources. So there are different types of attributes that we always need to consider. Now, let's meet the team for that resource engagement capability. So a resource engagement for me is nothing else but to formalize a resource request and an approval for that resource request. And as such, we need to have at least 3 parties. There may be more, there may be multiple resource managers or team leads, you may want to call them as well. But really, when we bring it down to the foundation, it is the team, so the resource that will conduct the work, so it's our workforce. It will be the project manager, so the resource or the project manager that requires the resource to execute their project. And it will also be, of course, the resource manager or team lead, as terminology can be exchanged here. But ultimately, it is the person that manages the work distribution of those resources and balances those work resources, of course. Now, each one of those parties actually have different requirements. Of course, the team needs to know what am I working on. They may even want to be able to give feedback on that item. For example, I have done that many hours on a task, or a task update, or maybe even a timesheet capability, which both of them are, of course, part of Project Online. The project manager, on the other hand, relies on the resource to execute, of course, the work and to finalize that work. And the resource manager wants to be able to balance the work to an optimal way, so that the resource is essentially busy more or less all the time between project and business and as usual work. However, ultimately what all of those parties require is visibility of the work items that they have, and ultimately, of course, also trust when it comes to the data set. You don't want to maintain data that are not accurate. So therefore, you need to make sure that you always understand why am I actually capturing the data? In the past, I never had to do that. I just spoke to a person. Well, the only reason why we capture those data sets, those formalization of the resource engagement, is so that I, as an organization, know exactly what's going on. Okay. So let's go through the first scenario, which really is the formal resource request and the ability for me to, as a project manager, to request that resource. So what I'm about to show you is a scenario that looks something along those lines. The project manager creates his project and as such will also create the resource requirements or resource demand for this particular project. Now, in some form, the project manager needs to communicate to the resource manager that demand. There are several different ways. The way that I will show you is that formalization way within the technology, within Project Online. On the other hand, the resource manager, and that's his job, needs to balance the workload of the work between business as usual and project work against the project team, and that is certainly not always easy. In order for the resource manager to make those decisions on which kind of approval request they accept or not, the resource manager requires that kind of visibility. Well, that visibility can be in form of reports, of graphs, of things like a heat map that I've outlined here, so that I can very easily see whether my resource pool is over or under allocated. In my example down here, blue means under allocated, green means optimally allocated, and red means over allocated. On the other hand, once the resource manager then knows whether he can approve that resource, that's the point in time where the resource manager can accept and approve that request, and the project manager then of course gets that information in their project. And really that is sort of that formal resource request that I would like to go through. Now, in my first demonstration, I'm going to show you exactly that. The project manager actually creates a project. I have created a project before, just so that we save a little bit of time. I've got some tasks, and now I want to be able to generate my resource assignment, and then I want to be able to generate my resource request. I want to be able to tell the resource manager what kind of request that is, and I will do that through the functionality of the resource plan. And the resource plan, even though the resource plan was in 2013 and 10 already in Project Online and in Project Server 2016, that resource plan feature set has actually changed slightly. Okay, let's have a look. Oops, sorry, not quite. That's right. I just want to outline in the demo. So the project manager is a project manager, and that's what we are logged on in right now. We will build a schedule and assign our resources. We will then create our so-called resource plan, and then we will submit that resource plan to the resource manager. Okay, so in order for me to do that, I'm going to actually log on to Project Online, and as you can see, this is nothing else but a Project Online instance that has projects, of course, in the project center with some visualizations and some timelines, some swim lanes, and of course this particular instance also has a team of resources, and we actually have a little application that we incorporated into Project Online that actually outlines our heat map. So in that instance, this is my team. I'm the team lead, and I can very easily see all of those different allocations, but I'll get back to that a little bit later. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a project I created earlier. I called this project the Project Resource Engagement Model Rollout, and that's the name that I gave it, and I already opened that up in MS Project, which is of course connected to Project Online, and I just simply have a very simple work breakdown structure with a couple of tasks, and as you can see, I've got some resources allocated to those tasks already. Now what I do in Project Online, I do nothing else but select my resource tab and select my global resource pool, that build team from project resource engagement model rollout project. Dialog window will appear, and on the left hand side you have all of the different resources, generic and non-generic resources, and on the right hand side you actually have all of the project resources. So in the past I just simply have some generic resources like the application architect, the business analyst, the developer and the project manager. And I could now, if I wanted to, already create a resource engagement model based on generic resources. Now in my instance what I will do is I will actually go and say, hey, as a project manager, do we actually have project managers that fulfill the roles of that project manager and the work of 200 hours? And as you can see, Bartel, Ben, Mark, Pete and Brian actually are project managers in that example. And what I do is I'm just going to allocate now Pete and replace the assignment of the project manager with a named resource. And as you can see, my generic resource project manager is now disappeared, and Pete is now in its place, to the point that when I say OK, you will see that the generic resource has actually now been replaced with Pete. I have the ability, and at the same time in MS Project, so that's a normal resource assignment to a task, but in Project Online I now have actually that little icon here that essentially says, hey, an assignment for this task needs an engagement or is in conflict with an existing one. Right click for options, and that's where that engagement model in Project Online comes into place. So in order for us as project managers to utilize the resource, I need to have an approval from the resource manager, and that approval from the resource manager is called the engagement. Now what I can do in good old-fashioned MS Project capability, on that icon I right click and I say, hey, fix this engagement in the engagement inspector. And what it does is it actually gives you a little wizard that outlines, hey, there are some assignments that haven't been covered in that engagement or in any kind of approval, so we need to do that. Now in order for me to look into the details, I'm going to view this engagement actually in a so-called task usage view. The task usage view gives me essentially that time-phased capability that I need in order to see how much time I actually need to have for a resource, for a particular project or for a particular resource. So what I do is I'm just going to bring this down to weeks, and as you can see, in the week of the 19th of October I need Pete for 8 hours, and in the following week I actually need it for 32 hours, so I can really see how I need that resource. So what I do is I'm going to then go and say create and save a new engagement for this particular resource. So what that technically does is when I select that, my engagement information dialog window appears, and you can see that it has selected my resource. I can give it a description, my project manager. You can see the start and finish date for this engagement model, and because I selected the resource on a particular task only, it automatically recognizes when that resource is needed. Now I can determine whether I want to allocate them based on units, or whether I want to allocate work, which is the actual effort. So I could say, hey, I only need 50% of Pete's time, for example, or alternatively